I want to talk about what y'all was just speaking about. Not saying I want to talk about it on the show. I said I just want to talk to you personally. And then, when I saw what, Joe Budden said about it, I agreed with Joe.
Well, it seems Joe Budden got an unlikely ally. One of his sworn podcast enemies went to the Native Land podcast and checked Tiffany Cross and Angela Rye for their elitist takes. After the Joe Budden, Mark Lamont Hill, Queens Flip moment,
I am your co-host, Tiffany Cross, here with Angela Rye.
Charlamagne joins the Native Land podcast. He says, watch the full context before you label, because reacting to clips instead of context is not enough. And as if she needs to be told, he has to tell her, you need to do your due diligence as a journalist before you react.
When I saw what, Joe Budden said about it, I agreed with Joe. I felt like, it came off, very elitist, very Jack and Jill, very, I got my nose up at these Negroes over here. And I don't think that, you don't make any strides in connecting community by doing that conversation in the way that it was done. I feel like, whenever there's, instead of calling people out, sometimes you should call people in. And the whole conversation around who's an intellectual and who's not an intellectual, my biggest issue with it was, well, damn, a person who's an intellectual should look at the whole context of a situation before they have a conversation about it. I feel like, Andrew said one of the strongest points last week when Andrew was like, I don't watch this show enough to have an opinion about it. and then he said, but I trust Mark, being Mark to be in spaces where, he knows he needs to be in. And as I'm listening to the convo, I told Angela that even when she told me that y'all wanted to talk about it, it came up as a topic of discussion. I said, well, make sure you watch the whole thing in context before you just watch a clip of it and then, speak on it for the next 20 or 30 minutes. Because to me, that's what an intellectual should do, right? Like, that's what an intelligent person should do. An intelligent person should get the whole context of something before they comment on it, instead of watching like 2 or 3 minutes of something and then actually taking the clip out of context. Because if you watch the clip in context, Mark was actually wrong.
Who gets to be called an intellectual and who gets labeled ignorant? That's the important question here. By the end of this, you'll see exactly where that line got crossed. No pun intended. You see what I did there? Tiffany, cross, whatever.
I hear what Charlamagne is saying, and I think a lot of comments echoed that. My personal background aside, I want to say that as a journalist, before I bring up anything on this show, I want our viewers to know I have indeed done my due diligence. So I didn't just watch the clip. How I prepared for that segment, I didn't pay for Patreon, but I did read the transcript of what happened. I even understood the word in question that was tricky, was allude. I understood that the conversation was about payment discrepancy. I spoke to Mark before I did this segment. I looked at literacy rates before I did this segment. I watched a few clips, or not clips, but segments, different segments from Joe Budden's podcast before I did this segment. And I will say, I stand by what I said. My perspectives and opinions don't sway in the winds of public opinion. Sometimes the cheese will stand alone. I do think there is very much a toxic landscape that is fueled by a lot of podcast bros. But I definitely agree with you, Charlamagne. Before you have an interview with anybody, before you sit down and speak on something, I would advise anyone to be well informed, whether it's politics, sports, anything like that. And so I don't think that the issue was that the collective was not well informed. I don't think that was my perspective. I think the issue that a lot of people felt is they felt attacked. And so I want to be clear that I wasn't saying who was an intellectual and who was not. My perspective was there is an anti-intellectual movement ravaging the Black community. I also want to be clear that I was not saying that no one should talk to Flip or Joe Budden. Certainly somebody should. Someone should be reaching out to them. That's not my ministry. Things I care about are the incarcerated and puppies. Most importantly, pit bulls. I don't like that tens of thousands of them get euthanized every month. It breaks my heart. I think about the incarcerated all the time. I don't want our Black men and women in prison thinking they're forgotten about. I think it's a bit arrogant of me to say, Angela, Bakari, Andrew, y'all should be talking to the incarcerated. That's not their ministry. But if Angela feels like, no, those are the people, or you, Charlamagne, if you feel like, no, those are the very people I want to be speaking to, then by all means, go do that. I'm saying it's hard to fill a cup that's already full. So if I'm telling you something and you're insulting me for my intelligence, I don't need to be where fools gather. So I stand on what I said. I'm not disrespecting any of them. But I just want to be clear. Our viewers know I never come on this podcast ever without being very well informed and researched and fact checked. And a fact check is not a 30-second Google search before I come on this show. It takes a lot of work to prepare for anything I introduce. And I would hope that we all do that.
Well, Tiff, it's interesting. You say you like talking to the incarcerated. Like, who do you think the incarcerated are listening to? Like, the incarcerated are listening to things like the Joe Budden podcast. Like, they're listening to, places like the Breakfast Club. Like, that's who they're actually tuning into. I know because I go speak at the jails. I was at Rikers Island a couple of weeks ago with Shaka Singh Kaur. I know when, these brothers from Rikers Island are writing into the Breakfast Club and telling me, like, what they like to listen to, what they like to read. So if you are trying to reach the incarcerated, you got to go where the incarcerated is at. Like,
I go directly into the prisons as well through a teaching program and also through a journalism program that I've talked about here. Prison journalism is a project that I support. So I'm not necessarily trying to talk to Joe Budden to talk to the incarcerated. I'm trying to talk directly to the incarcerated. I don't want to air out anybody's business, but I got people in my immediate family who are the incarcerated, which is another thing. I think it's important for people to understand. I am not I don't think that intellect has anything to do with degrees, pedigree, how much money you make, because I saw a lot of they all make more money than you. I know a lot of rich fools, and I know a lot of degreed idiots. I've sat across from tables of CEOs who I did not find terribly intelligent. I went to school with a lot of debutantes that I don't find terribly intelligent. It's not a diss to them, but I wouldn't necessarily put them in that category either. I think it's important. I just want people to know I don't come from, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. In my family right now, I'm not of that world. And I don't think, what we call like elitism, I don't necessarily think being of that world is a bad thing. I also don't believe in putting people down because you did grow up privileged or because you did have parents who had multiple degrees or money. None of these things makes you a bad person. To me, what I find frustrating is when you are not receptive or curious. I don't need to talk to people wherever you are, whatever your background is. If you're not receptive or curious, then you are likely not my audience and I'm likely not yours. I am curious about things. I can learn from anybody, but I don't necessarily respect everybody's opinion. And I don't think all the people say I respect everybody's opinion. Use a lie. I don't believe that. There are people there. Go ahead.
Can you be intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion?
Yes. You looking at somebody who's intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion.
But what really happened here is that Charlamagne actually exposed a deeper problem. It's a class divide, and people are on both sides of this. Now, I'm not normally one to delve into the class issues because I feel like it's kind of a red button topic. It's kind of like a bailout for most people not to discuss what's really going on in most circumstances. But in this point, there is a discussion here about class. Angela Rye and Tiffany Cross represent a certain class in their mind. But here's where it gets complicated, because if you only engage with people with degrees or titles after their names or pedigree, you're not being an intellectual. You're just being an elitist. And I think that's what's on display here.
Can you be intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion?
Yes. You looking at somebody who's intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion.
Because I consider myself intellectually curious, so I'm the type of person that I'm going to hear you out. I may not want to hear you again, but I'm going to at least take the opportunity to listen to you at least one time.
No, there's a gentleman by the name of Corey. He is a lovely person. He happens to be schizophrenic and homeless, and he's in the front of my building. And he has an opinion on everything. And I sit there and chat with Corey sometimes just because he's so nice and so sweet. And I give him bread because he likes to feed the birds. I don't respect Corey's opinion on anything. He got opinion on the financial systems and the banks and all the things that he wants to tell me about. I'm nice to him. I'm kind to him. I give him bread. I would be lying to you to say I respect Corey's opinion. When
But
I have interviewed,
you had to speak to him. You had to speak to him at least one time to understand that.
yes, I can speak to anybody.
Yeah.
I'm never saying I don't speak to anybody. But once I ascertain, oh, you are not a curious person. Once you are saying things to me like you using tricky words, and this isn't just a center flip in that conversation, because I'm really trying to broaden this out into anybody who's incurious. Once you are clear to me that you are not curious about what I have to say, when I would interview different like man on the street interviews during the Obama race, and people would say the most ignorant things to me. Or when you would hear lazy reporters go out to Trump rallies and they would say, well, Obama gave Iran millions of dollars. He's in cahoots with Iran and he's a Muslim. I don't respect your opinion anymore. Now you sound like a fool. And I'm giving you reason right there in real time, challenging you. But I can't fill a cup that's already full. So now, no, I don't respect your opinion.
But Charlamagne really caught her up when he brought up the topic of Stephen A. Smith. Of course, Tiffany was very critical of Stephen A. Smith in recent weeks. It just adds a whole other layer to this.
I understand. I guess the issue comes, and I can't believe I'm on here defending the Joe Budden podcast, right? but I guess the issue is I don't think fools go together at the Joe Budden podcast. I don't think anybody in that room...
I didn't say that, for the record.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in that room is a fool. And I also feel like, we should be happy that people like Mark Lamont Hill want to be on big black platforms. I think that's the biggest problem I have right now is that, we tend to knock, certain platforms when what we should be doing is infiltrating those platforms. I know everybody likes to, go at Stephen A. Smith. I want to see more black elected officials, more black politicians, more black spiritual leaders, more black activists, more black people with something to say about black issues go on platforms like Stephen A. Smith. Because all the white elected officials are taking advantage of it.
Do you know why they're taking advantage of it? Because they're laughing at a fool. That when people because I think that's such an important point. White politicians are going on there because they are elevating him to a position, and they only do this specifically in the black community. They are elevating him into a position that he did not earn. He is an expert in sports. And so you will have white people all the time pluck an entertainer. Right. Whatever he expert in is not politics, is not policy.
But
and if you're going to pluck an entertainer.
He has an audience.
An audience does not equate to intellect or intelligence.
You guys,
I'm not saying
I want to hear what you have to say about defending Stephen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying these black people who have these large audiences, instead of sitting on the sidelines complaining about them having a large audience and who didn't earn what, how about go on that platform and deliver some of that truth or some of that intellect that you have to his audience? Even if you sit around and you talk about, you saying about the guy, the person that sits outside of your stoop and they have a lot of misinformation, or you talk about the people that were saying the things about Obama. Those people will continue to have misinformation if somebody doesn't go to them and inform them.
But this was the point that you missed. I'm sorry. Let me just respond, please. This is the point that maybe you missed. I'm saying when I'm trying to inform you, when I'm saying, no, that is actually not true about Obama, and somebody saying, yes, it is, because okay, you are not curious at that point. You are not receptive. Right. I can't feel your bucket is full. You don't want to hear what I have to say. Number two, I'm not complaining about anyone having a large audience. I'm complaining about who his audience is. He has a large audience of mostly conservative white folks, and they are treating him. This is no diss to Stephen. Do you have data to back
that up, Tiffany? Do you have statistics that say Stephen A. Smith's audience is majority conservative white folks?
I do. Nielsen ratings, or his ESPN show, Nielsen ratings qualifies that.
Well, no, that's ESPN. I'm talking about his podcast, because most of the time when he's spewing political takes...
I don't know his podcast. I just know he built his audience on a majority of white people. So I don't, and I would love to dig into, and I'm happy to come on here next week, because I would love to somebody to prove to me that his audience is a majority of black people.
See, that's a feeling, but that's a fact. So does that make you anti-intellectual because you're spewing feelings instead of
no, but it's not even. but
Tiff,
it's not even.
Leonard and
I'm
Tiff-
going to respond to this. It's not even a feeling, though.
It's literally 5 minutes left in the
Okay,
conversation.
but I want to respond to what he said.
You guys haven't let anybody else weigh in
I'll
here.
weigh in, but I'm going to respond to this. He said that's a feeling or an opinion. Not necessarily. It's somewhat informed, because if you look at who his audience, how he built his audience, the suggestion that a majority of his audience will be comprised of Black people is not a well-informed one. It's logic to say most of his audience are white people. Are you suggesting that most of his audience are Black people?
I don't know what most of his audience is, but I know I started, reading Stephen A's columns when he was writing for the Philadelphia Inquirer, when he was covering Allen Iverson way back in the day. And then I followed him to Cold Pizza and First Take and everything else. I think that this new, political Stephen A with a conservative audience is relatively new. So I would, before these white people were talking about him, it was majority Black people in the barbershop that was talking about Stephen A. But I'm just talking about the audience in general. Like, you said Mark Lamont Hill shouldn't be on Joe Budden's show. Why? You said
Did I say he shouldn't be?
You actually said he should be on CNN.
Yes. So that's the difference between saying he should not be on Joe Budden. I'm saying he should be on CNN because he should have never gotten fired from CNN. If Mark is happy on Joe Budden's podcast, more power to it. What I said was they lack an understanding of Mark. I felt like he's disrespected on that podcast based on clips that I had seen. What Angela said, and Angela caught a lot of strays for things I said, so I want to be clear. What Angela referenced was a moment where they dismissed his humanity on that show when he talked about his friends being killed in Palestine. And I do think that is based on what I've seen, I do think that is a consistent pattern where I do feel like Mark is not necessarily well received there. But Angela wants to get other people in, so I'll be quiet.
I will say Joe did apologize.
Leonard and Tiffany, it's more than just you two in here. Just hold on. But Joe, you the one that got a heart. Let me get these dudes in here.
I know, but Joe did apologize.
This is crazy.
Does Tiffany have a problem with Black men is the question. That's what I'm wondering, because that's what I get from this, from her stubbornness and unwillingness to see where these people are coming from. And she says that she's curious as an intellectual, but for some reason she can't wrap her mind around this. She can't be open to any perspectives from other people. It seems like she's very adamant and doesn't want to move on her positions in this regard because we're discussing Black men. But Charlamagne caught her ass up. It's funny, they want to throw away Joe Budden's whole audience without really knowing who they are. They're not really sure exactly what the demographics are of the Joe Budden podcast. And I unfortunately think it comes from being in the silo of the mainstream media for so long. At MSNBC and CNN, you can pick what a group is and make everybody else an other, clearly so that you can go after them. So Tiffany wants to say Joe Budden's audience is purely one thing, and that as a group, they're somebody you wouldn't need to respect because they don't have respect for the opinions of others. But what's shocking here is how they learned that there's a lot of overlap in the two audiences between the Native Land Pod and the Joe Budden podcast.
I didn't know we were at a war of words with other podcasts till this morning. My brother told me. He's a subscriber to Patreon. And he was like, I was about to cancel my subscription if they would go come at you. And I was like, who are you talking about? Because I don't even know who Patreon is. And then, we get in the dialogue and he's telling me who is what. And I'm like, yeah, we said something, but it was in response to this, that, and the third.
You got to be where your audience is. You got to meet your audience somewhere in between. And unfortunately, I think people like Angela Rye and Tiffany Cross have been stuck in this echo chamber. And I also fault the Democratic Party for not reaching out to other groups outside of themselves, outside of their core, just assuming that you know what those other people are thinking. That's been a problem for the longest time. We talked about it with the Roland Martin situation. We talked about it with a lot of these Black pundits. They really assume they know the Black community without acknowledging the whole of the Black community. And that's why you continue to lose election after election. Until you get this through your head, you won't ever evolve into a place where you'll win again. We get preached down to and told what to do. And then if you go against that, somehow you're not in the Black community. You're not my mother. You can't mommy me. That's what I'm trying to say. You can't mommy grown men. You can't other us to a place where you can dictate to us what's going on. I don't know where they're getting their data. I don't know where they get their information, but this is just childish behavior. This very myopic thinking, this simplistic thinking. And I challenge all of you all. If you're really open and you're really curious and you want to understand where people are coming from, don't write off your family members because you don't agree with them politically. I challenge you to actually engage with them and have a conversation and see where they're coming from, because you might be surprised. Don't be like Tiffany Cross, who doesn't want to have a conversation at all about something that she might disagree with. The real reason here, the thing that gives her away, is that she's equaling Joe Budden and his podcast audience to a schizophrenic man, a schizophrenic homeless man that lives in front of her building. How insulting is that? How insulting is that? That's what she thinks of us. And that's the problem here. She has almost dehumanized black men to put them in a box that she can deal with. If these guys are talking anything but the talking point, somehow they're MAGA or they're somehow outside of the black community. You all are just like the guy I give bread to in front of my building, and I can pat him on the head and say, those stupid talking points you have, wherever you came up with them from, they shouldn't be taken seriously. The Democrats will continue losing if they continue on with this elitist path, if they keep pushing their men away. And this whole conversation about intellectualism is false as well, because what they really don't think about is the intellectual Mark Lamont Hill, their homeboy, was the one who actually ratcheted up that conversation to the point where it was about to be a real altercation. You know, real intellectuals invite conversation. They don't get triggered on one thing, because you're supposed to be able to articulate your points and argue your points. But you have to be curious enough to be informed by people that you wouldn't expect to be informed by. What we're seeing Tiffany do here by doubling down is Tiffany is showing her immaturity by continuing to argue her point. But hey, it is what it is. But I'm glad we got heard, because I would say the video I did on this channel actually had some impact, hopefully, on potentially somebody from that show seeing it and decided that they needed to say something, that an apology was due. Like, I'll give Angela credit. She apologized to the Joe Budden podcast and the Queen's Flip.
The thumbnail for last week's show said Joe Budden's podcast and the dumbing down of America, and Bakari standing there in the middle getting the haze up. He getting hazed up for another 2 months. So he was in the middle of it. And I think that what we did wrong, and I do want to apologize to Joe Budden's podcast, to their team, to their production company for that title. I'm an EP on this show, and so I own that wholeheartedly. We should have titled it differently. Maybe they wouldn't have looked at it, but they got us back. They got the whole podcast taken down for copyright infringement because we actually used their clip. They only took that clip out. It's still under challenge. We reposted it without the clip. But I would just say to them, well played, but I do apologize for titling the podcast. Well, maybe it was meant for that.
You know, this is one step short of potentially making an appearance on the show, which I believe was kind of tossed about. But after Joe Budden got in her ass the way he did, I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon, but it is what it is. It's worth a shot. It was refreshing for Charlamagne to actually make this move. You know, Charlamagne and Joe Budden were cool at one point. They were doing shows and special events, and they were always kind of like frenemies, but it gave Charlamagne a chance to offer an olive branch. And I think Joe Budden in his own way was grateful for that, for Charlamagne standing up for him.
This is Charlamagne, hold it down. Yes, sir. I do want to shout out. Let me shout him out.
Shout him out.
Shout out Charlamagne. All right. Anyway.
What the fuck? Hey, what the fuck?
The 10-second abridged version is Charlamagne appeared on native land to kind of hold them to task for how they engaged us. So this is like the third round of food for Thanksgiving in a sense. Like the content is producing more content. Basically, everybody's making money off us, Flip.
But
that's the short answer.
But Charlamagne used his voice to defend me and us.
And the pod. Yeah, no, Charlamagne held it down.
And I appreciate that. Let me not even make a joke about it. I do appreciate Charlamagne doing that. He didn't have to do it, especially with his people. So I'm assuming that he really believes that and felt that way. So shout out to him.
Did anybody double down? You should watch it. I don't want to over promote the other platforms, but it was a spirited exchange between Charlamagne and Tiffany
The
Cross.
same little nobody girl that nobody cared about the first time, which is why we didn't say your name the first time, because you're not nobody.
I'm not
so
gonna
it
call
don't matter
We
that
gotta
you double
invite
down.
She's somebody.
Angela
If you know, no, she's not. She's not nobody.
Shout out to Tiffany Cross. She's somebody.
gotta
Former
invite
MSNBC
Angela
host.
up.
Maybe somebody in that world.
Angela, come up
Maybe
and argue
somebody
with
over
us.
Bro, if I'm somewhere and somebody call you nobody, I'm not gonna be quiet.
Respect.
He can say it, but I know that's my people. I'm not gonna say.
Mark, if they call me nobody somewhere, let them have it.
Yeah, same.
Give a fuck.
I'm
And
around
you
for all
can just be
y'all.
fly with a nobody.
And that's what we got to do. When you see something is wrong, go there, confront it, and stand on your principle. Because Charlamagne is also a podcast guy. He got to show support to his fellow brethren whenever he can. Because honestly, this whole intellectual debate could have very well been applied to Charlamagne and some of the content that he creates. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification for all uploads. Make sure you sign up for the Patreon. The link is in the description and the pinned comment down below. And I think on the 1st of November, we're going to be doing our first YouTube coaching event. So make sure you sign up now so that you get the alert for the coaching. This is Faucette Media.